Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television. That's channel 26.1 mostly, but we have a new broadcast schedule now, different times on Saturdays and Sundays on two of the networks that Great Plains Televisions have. So you can check the website for that. My website, of course, The Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org, holds all the old episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, show notes for this and other episodes, plus all the other content that I and others create almost every other day at wichitaliberty.org. Today our guest is Joy Eakins. She is a Wichita School Board member nearing the end of her first four-year term and her last four-year term, at least for now that we know of, as she decided earlier this year she would not run for election. And some of the issues that Joy is here to talk about have been in the news recently. So one thing, Joy, is that this is the first year that school board and city council elections are being held in the fall season rather than in the spring season. And I know that you testified in favor of that change at the legislature. Other school board members wanted to keep it the way the current status quo with elections in March and April. How do you think it's working out to switch to fall, and why were the other board members opposed to the change?
Well, I think it's working out great. We have a large field of candidates in the school board for City of Wichita, and it's probably one of the largest we've had in quite a while. We have a lot of engagement. There's been several forums, many more forums than we've had in the past. And we already know that we have more mail-in ballots requested, 4 times more than in past local elections. So I think that's good, because the idea that the legislature had was to promote engagement in local elections, because so much happens and so much impacts us in the local election.
And I think the thought typically is that with a low turnout election, that special interest groups, whoever they may be, have a better chance at impacting the elections in their favor.
Right, and I think we see that in other states where local elections are held in spring. By the time you finish, for example, this year would have been after a presidential election, then people are trying to sign up by the end of January, and then the results or the voting is in April. So there's very little time to get your message out and for people to make a decision, and most people don't even realize there's a vote. And one of the reasons I testified for it is I've lived in 2 different states where we had November elections for school board, and I think it makes sense because during the spring, the school board will be deciding budgets for next year. They'll be working through negotiations, hopefully, for next year. The legislature will be in session, and they'll be working with them on the finance formula and what happened with the Supreme Court. So all of those things are happening in a session. If people took their seat in July, they would miss all of those discussions and just be asked to basically rubber stamp a decision another board made. So I think it makes sense to do those in the fall and then give people a chance to have input.
And a lot of people are amazed to learn that their local school district is probably the biggest budget of their local governments. The USD 259 is larger than either the city of Wichita or Sedgwick counties, for example, so it's a lot of money. In a op-ed that you wrote that was published in the Wichita Eagle, you have been on the lone end of some votes in the minority, a minority of 1, and I think Karl's been that way, and I think I have too on some boards I've been on. But you say that someone told you that to have a 6-1 or 5-2 vote on an issue is harmful, that's not good for the district in some way.
Right. I think the sort of general conversation around me for 4 years has been, 4.5 years almost, has been that when there's a split vote, that's bad for the district because it looks like we're not in unity. And my take is that a split vote shows that people have thoroughly considered all the viewpoints and then made a decision, the best decision that they think they can make. And so it shows thoughtful consideration and courage to have a split vote. I think there's also this sort of idea out there that I voted in the lone voter all the time, a lot, when in actuality I think there's a handful of votes where I voted no on, but there are things that I thought were important.
Because a lot of the issues the board votes on are really not that controversial, but there are from time to time.
We buy chicken nuggets, you
Yeah.
have to say yes, we'll buy chicken nuggets and paper, but some things, right.
And that brings up another point, which is that buying the chicken nuggets is probably on something called a consent agenda,
Correct.
which is many boards have them. The city of Wichita does, Sedgwick
County.
County, where there's a large number, maybe a dozen to, could be a lot of items, thought to be non-controversial, so they're put on a consent agenda where one vote is taken on all of them. There's no discussion about any of them unless a board member decides to say, hey, could we pull item number 5 and talk about that, potentially to have a vote different. And that's been an issue at the school board. And when we come back from our commercial break, Karl and Joy, you can weigh in on what you think is good or bad about consent agendas. Is there a need for reform? We'll be back with more Wichita Liberty TV in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, of course, co-host Karl Peterjohn. Our guest this week, Joy Eakins of the Wichita School Board. We were talking about consent agendas, and just before I ask you your opinion of that, the current board president spoke at the Pachyderm Club a few months ago and said that we've hashed out what's on the consent agenda before the meeting. We know how we're going to vote. So what's wrong with having a consent agenda, or what's good about it?
I think consent agendas are good when they're things that we routinely purchase, like I've mentioned chicken nuggets, or when you have to pay for specific items over and over and over again, because you know those are coming, you know you're going to do those, and so you have those on the list. I think where consent agendas can run into trouble is when you put new items on there, or if there's a change order or a problem, and then it gets stuck on a consent agenda and somebody has to pick it off. Now, it is true, I mean, when things are when we're buying garbage can liners, and if you need to ask a question about it, the superintendent is always open and welcome and to answer those things. But if you have something rather large and on a consent agenda that's a new item, it really needs to be in the new business or in the rest of the agenda, in my opinion.
And who decides what goes on the consent agenda versus would be a regular item?
According to board policy, the president and vice president meet with the superintendent and some of her staff every a couple of weeks before the meeting, and they make decisions about what would be included on the agenda and then what would be included under consent versus on the new side. So really, it is the board that makes those decisions. The superintendent may make suggestions, but the board president and vice president make those decisions.
Did you have any problem at all if something came up between the time that the agenda was put together and you had your actual meeting with the consent agenda, and as an individual board member to say, hey, I've got a question about item R, let's say, on the consent agenda, and having it pulled off? Because that occurred fairly frequently. I won't say at every meeting, but it was known to happen at the county commission, where a commissioner would say, hey, I've got a question or a concern or would like a clarification. And sometimes it was nothing more than to get some details and make sure it was on the record. How does it work at the...
Right, so there's two ways. One is often before we go to agenda review, I'll send a list of questions that I'm going to have just to let them know in case there's some detail that they don't have. They can make sure they get it from the right person or have the right person there at agenda review. But then the current board policy says any board member can pull any item off consent and ask a question about it or handle that during the meeting. So I've always felt free to do that, and I have used that power judiciously.
But then there's no mandates or state law that inhibits you in any way, shape, or form on this?
No.
Okay.
Although in today's Wichita Eagle, we're recording on Thursday here, that there's a proposed policy that, according to the reporting, would limit board members' authority to pull items from the consent agenda.
That's one of the concerns I have in some of the policy that's out there, and I'm looking at policy changes that have been sort of out there for us to think about and vote on. And one of my concerns is that they changed the word from the board member will to the board member may. And it appears that there might be some at discretion of someone else. They may be allowed to pull things. And I think it's important for board members to be able to pull items and ask questions whenever they need to, because they are representatives of the community. And I think it also is more transparent to the community when they know we can pull things off, and if we have a question, we will.
Also reported in the same paragraph of the reporting that perhaps a policy would prohibit a single board member from requesting reports from district staff.
Right, I have a question about that as well, and I'm looking forward to having the discussion at the table about it, because we haven't had a board discussion about that yet. In current policy, anyone can make a board request, and in that same policy it says if your board request takes more than 2 hours to compile, it will come back to the board for a vote at that time. And I think that's fair, because you don't want a board member to create a report that takes 10 or 15 hours. You know, maybe they report 3 or 4 of them, and now you've eaten up somebody's week. And sometimes board members will hear that and say, oh, well, how can I change that report so that I can fit it in the 2 hours and really narrow down the scope of what I need. But I think it's important for board members to be able to get the information that they need and not feel like they have to always go get somebody to vote on it.
Yeah, so you are supplied with a lot of information, I presume, in the agenda packets, but that's information that someone has decided this is what we want the board members to know. Do you ever feel like they're not really happy that someone else is doing maybe an independent investigation, finding some other information that they're not feeding you?
I'm not sure I've ever picked up on anything either way with that. I've always felt like I could ask the questions I needed to ask. Sometimes it's taken a long time to get answers, but at one point the board president, Cheryl Logan, really worked hard to make sure that I was getting the answers I needed, and so that helped change some things. But sometimes those board requests can sit out there for a while, and it always makes me wonder why, but maybe they're just busy.
And sometimes I know I've made records requests that they say is going to take a tremendous amount of time and effort to compile, when I thought this is something that should be pretty easy, just like a ledger from an accounting system or something. It's not always that way. I know Karl's got a question, but we have to take a commercial break, so we'll be back with more Wichita Liberty TV in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Our guest, Joy Eakins of the Wichita School Board. Co-host Karl Peterjohn, and you had a question, I believe, for our guest.
Yes, there have been a number of controversies related to the school district, and length of the school day has been one of them. That I think you were in the minority on some of the votes that were held on that. Would you talk about that and the impact that change has had, in your opinion?
Sure. Well, that was a really difficult decision to make, because I was sharing with someone yesterday, when we were making that decision, no one that I was talking to was saying, don't change the school day. It was change the school day and save jobs. And even parents were on that side. But when I started thinking about the educational impact to our students, losing 15 days in a classroom and replacing it with a 4-minute period in the secondary, or having kindergartners go to after 4:30 every day, I just couldn't get to a place where that seemed like a good educational decision for our students. So I just decided, I kind of got to the precipice, I think I said at the time, and looked and realized I couldn't vote yes for that. We really needed to look for that in a different place.
Do you think there was enough transparency in the process and able to get public and parental input in particular?
I think I had a lot of conversations myself, and we had a lot of people come to the board in that process. I think that there were several 3x3s in that process that we had. And
3x3?
3x3 is when 3 members of the board can meet, or fewer can meet with the superintendent to get some details. And I think there's a place for 3x3s. There's sort of like agenda reviews. You get big overviews of things, and sometimes they're things about personnel or students that you don't necessarily want to release yet. But then I think once you get through that first piece, it would have been really great to have a budget workshop where we just sit down and look at the options and people talk about what are the pros and cons of this item versus that item, because the list was out there. Then to have the conversation about pros and cons of those items is a little more transparent and a good way to have, in my opinion, a good way to have that conversation.
And those meetings are purposefully held with a small number of board members, because once you get above a certain number of members of an elected board, then the Kansas Open Meetings Act says this is now a meeting and the public has to be notified and so forth like that.
Correct. And I had concerns when I first went on the board about how 3x3s were used, and spoke with our lawyer and got some kind of understanding of what would be crossing the line. So I really looked for, are we crossing the line in these meetings? And I didn't see people electioneering or trying to figure out what the vote was going to be in those conversations. And I want to be upfront about that. I've tried to be really clear about that all along the way. But I do think that there were some conversations that we could have had. It's courageous to have them in public and let people hear what you're thinking. Why are you thinking that cutting IB is a bad idea and cutting librarians is a better one? So
if there's no controversy or no diversity of opinion, then why even go through the motions, I guess, is what we might say. On that length of the school day, I mean, the school district did this to save money. They had 15 fewer days of school to keep the same number of contact hours or minutes or whatever. They made the school days longer. So I guess two issues were, is the day too long? Are kids tired at the end of the day? But then also I think we talked about this on the radio, that there's a loss of learning during the summer. I mean, kids have to get ramped back up again. To add another 15 days, which is really 2 or 3 weeks of calendar time, I suppose, to the summertime, that makes that even worse, doesn't it?
Right, we are seeing that already happen with our students. They also have a longer break at Christmas, so they're out almost 3 weeks in that period of time. So we're going to see learning decline. Our teachers are telling us that that's going to happen. In the survey of 14,000 Wichitans, they told us that that's what they're already seeing last year. And so we have to change the calendar back and get those 15 days back, in what I think. I have a son, he's a freshman in high school, and I think, man, at the end of this year, he'll have lost 30 days of instruction, and so that's a lot of days to lose.
Let me ask you, have there been other impacts on the district by this change in policy that you're aware of?
Right, we know that we've lost both elementary students and we've lost teachers because of the schedule, because when we lost elementary students, we followed up with their families. They told us the day was too long and they were leaving. So we've lost over 400 students who gave that as a reason. We've lost numerous staff. I don't have those numbers on the top of my head, but we have lost staff over the same thing. So we know that there's a long-term financial impact as well as a brain drain on our talent by this change. So there's a lot of unintended consequences that we didn't, I think by not having those conversations and having a chance to really push on each other to think about them, then we didn't think long-term what those decisions might do to us.
And I think there were some alternatives. If I remember that there was a proposal to outsource custodial services that would save the district some money and mitigate the need, the perceived need, I should say, for cutting this. But it seems like some board members thought that the schools being a jobs program was more important than an educational institution serving children.
Well, I think that last $3 million cut that we had to make $3 million to me seems like a lot of money, because I don't have a $3 million. But if you have a $300 million job and you're cutting, or $300 million budget and you're cutting $3 million, that's really not very much. That's like having a job where you make $1,000 a week and you have to cut $10 a week out of your budget. Now, this district has lost $98 million through all of the different cuts over several years in their general fund, but still $10 as opposed to what the outcome has been to our students is not quite that much.
And I think that's where some people get frustrated and wondering just who is the school district really thinking about when they make some of these things. But we're going to take our last commercial break for this week on Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back again in just a moment. Well, welcome back to this last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for this week. Bob Weeks, of course, with co-host Karl Peterjohn. Our guest this week, Joy Eakins of the Wichita School District. And one question, Joy, I've had, and I don't know who has the answer for this, but we have the Wichita Public Schools, yet large sections of Wichita, the city, are in the Mays, Goddard, and Andover school districts, most notably, plus maybe a couple others even. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, do you think, to have big parts of a city go to not that city's schools? I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure I know either. It's certainly the way we are. It's the way things have been for a long time.
And it's a historical artifact. It wasn't planned that way, really.
Right, I think you see that in other cities around the country. You know, we lived in the Denver area for a while, and there's all kinds of suburbs of the Denver area that have their own school systems, and so I think it's probably a matter of preference. And
sometimes in big cities, I'm thinking like Chicago and New York, the mayor is the head of the school system. I don't think he does the job of a superintendent and so forth, but there's some political accountability there that may not be present. I mean, the board members are elected, but how often do board members not even have opponents in elections, or at least opponents that have the wherewithal to run a campaign? What do you think it'd be much different if the superintendent was elected by the voters of the district rather than the board?
I think the system we have is actually better than that. And I know there are those that would oppose that idea, but the person who's running the day-to-day operations of the school in a city the size of Wichita really needs to be free of the political process and be able to do their job to manage the system. And there needs to be, I believe the local school board is probably the most important elected group in the state of Kansas. Now, some people in the city council may disagree with me, but really we impact not just what's happening today, but for the next generation to come.
Right.
We also have a huge impact on the economic work for the future. So I think having a group of people who are dedicated to that and having elections in a place where there's more attention to it, driving people to that. And then I think it's also on us as citizens. I mean, I'm stepping off the board, but I can't stop being paying attention to what's happening, looking for other people who might make good candidates in the future, and really promoting the importance of that position in our city.
But let me ask you this question, because there's been talk about adding a deputy superintendent, which we haven't had in a long time. We've got number of assistant superintendents. I believe it's 4. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. And do we need a deputy superintendent, especially in light of, I've heard from parents who are concerned they're having to pay increased fees for like AP placement tests and that sort of thing?
That's a great question. Our superintendent tells me that she needs a deputy superintendent, and when I talk to her and look at what she's trying to do be a strategic leader, visionary, and look forward, and then put things in place for people to do the day-to-day.
And this is Alicia Thompson, who's in her first year as superintendent.
Dr. Thompson, and she's worked in the district for a long time when we had deputy superintendents. So in her expert opinion, she feels that she needs somebody to help head up some of the core changes that we're asking her to make and be directly responsible to her for that and accountable to her for that. So I'm going to take her lead on that as a board member, because we have asked her to do a lot. We've asked her to make a lot of changes and to bring our students forward. And in order for her to do that, she's going to need to be out working on strategic partnerships with different groups in town, as well as having this visionary leadership in the district and helping people move that forward. And that takes a lot of time, so she needs somebody day to day focusing on curriculum and education and in elementary and making sure those things are moving in the right direction.
Let me ask you, you mentioned funding. That's been a controversy with the state and the Kansas Supreme Court's rulings. The school district spending about $680 million total budget, roughly. Is that a reasonable? Am I pretty close on that ballpark?
It's close. Mm-hmm.
You'd mentioned $300 million. Is there some differentiation there between either state and local funds, or between general fund versus some of the special funds like special ed and transportation and so on?
Right. So when I was talking about the $300 million fund earlier, that was our general fund for general ed, it's our general fund, and it is different than some of our other funds that we have, including special ed, nutrition, textbooks, all kinds of things. But that was the fund that we had that we needed to balance out the year we cut the school day, or lengthen the school day.
Lengthen the school day, but cut the number of days in
number
the
of
school
days,
year.
right.
That can be a little tricky.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, we're running down out of time here. So, Joy, thanks very much for appearing today. Hope that you remain involved in the schools and in the community. I know that you have a business, I think, that you've mentioned is growing, so I'm sure that takes a lot of your time to nurture that along, and that's very important too. So, Joy Eakins, Wichita School Board, Karl Peterjohn, co-host. I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.